Have you ever stopped to think about how a global superpower, an empire that stretched across 11 time zones, could just vanish? I mean, one day it's there, a pillar of the world order, and the next, it's gone from the map. That is the incredible story we're diving into today, the dramatic final years of the Soviet Union. It's a story of immense power, a slow, grinding decay, and a final collapse that changed everything. Just listen to this quote. Conceived in utopian promise, dismembered, bankrupt, and hungry, but awe-inspiring even in its fall. Wow, that really captures the epic, almost tragic scale of it all, doesn't it? And it gets right to the heart of the question we're going to explore. How on earth did a nation built on such a revolutionary dream come to such a stunning, sudden end? All right, so to really understand the fall, we first have to appreciate the incredible heights from which it fell. For decades, the Soviet Union wasn't just another country. It felt like an immovable, permanent force on the world stage, one of the two poles holding up the entire global order. From the moment World War II ended, the world basically split in two. You had the United States in the West on one side, and on the other, the USSR leading the entire Eastern Bloc. This kicked off the Cold War. We're talking about a terrifying nuclear arms race, the high-stakes space race, and ideological proxy wars fought all across the globe. This was so much more than a rivalry. It was a fundamental clash over what the future of humanity would look like. And you have to understand, this superpower status wasn't just about missiles and tanks. It was deeply psychological. For millions of Soviet citizens, it was a core part of their identity. It was a source of immense pride, a force so powerful that it united a vast, diverse population of different ethnicities, all under that single red flag. But underneath that shiny surface of superpower pride, deep cracks were starting to form. This period, which historians now call the era of stagnation, was this long, slow, grinding decline that quietly set the stage for the final dramatic collapse. And a huge part of the problem started right at the very top. From the mid-1960s onward, the Soviet Union was led by what's called a gerontocracy, basically rule by the elderly. You had Brezhnev, then Andropov, then Chernenko, one after another. This aging leadership was rigid, conservative, and resistant to any kind of real change. So while the rest of the world was modernizing, the Kremlin felt like it was frozen in time, presiding over a system that was slowly but surely seizing up. And you can see the results of that paralysis right here, in the hard economic numbers. After some pretty solid growth in the 1960s, the economy just falls off a cliff. By the early 80s, growth had slowed to an absolute crawl. The centrally planned command economy, which was once an engine of industrialization, just couldn't innovate or adapt anymore. It had become a recipe for stagnation. And look, this economic decay wasn't just some abstract number on a chart. This was the daily, grinding reality for ordinary people. Can you imagine widespread shortages of everything? Food, medicine, soap. Imagine having to stand in line for hours just to get the most basic goods. Your money is becoming worthless because inflation is out of control. Factories can't even pay their workers. It was the human cost of a system that was completely failing its people. So into this full-blown crisis steps one of the most pivotal figures of the 20th century, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was younger, he saw the writing on the wall, and he knew the Soviet Union was in desperate need of reform. So he made a desperate gamble. He believed he could save the system by radically changing it from within. Gorbachev's whole plan rested on two revolutionary twin policies. First, you have glasnost, which means openness. This meant loosening censorship, allowing criticism of the government, and letting people access information for the first time in generations. And second, there was perestroika, or restructuring, which was a massive, ambitious plan to overhaul the stagnant Soviet economy and its political system. But right here, this was the fatal flaw. The contradiction at the very heart of his reforms. Think about it. To push through the incredibly painful economic changes of perestroika, Gorbachev needed the absolute, unquestioned power of the Communist Party. But his other policy, glasnost, did the exact opposite. It encouraged public criticism, it exposed the system's flaws, and it completely dismantled the very authority he needed to enact his reforms. He was pressing the accelerator and the brake at the exact same time. You see, the entire Soviet system was built on a foundation of unquestioning obedience. You just did what you were told. When glasnost gave people permission to question everything, to openly talk about history, to voice their long-suppressed national identities, that foundation just crumbled. Gorbachev had accidentally created a paradox that he couldn't solve. And this simmering conflict finally exploded in the summer of 1991. Fearing the complete disintegration of their country and their power, a group of hardline communists decided it was time to turn back the clock. They launched a dramatic, last-ditch coup to seize control. So, on August 18th, the plotters cut Gorbachev's phone lines at his vacation home and put him under house arrest. The next morning, tanks rolled into the streets of Moscow. But they didn't count on Boris Yeltsin, the fiery president of the Russian Republic. He did something absolutely legendary. He climbed on top of a tank outside the Parliament building and called for the people to resist. And for 3 incredibly tense days, the world held its breath. In the end, the coup was a total fiasco. It was poorly planned, but more importantly, it was met with incredible defiance from ordinary citizens. The decisive moment came when key military units were given the order to storm the parliament and attack their own people, and they refused. With the army unwilling to shed blood, the whole plot just unraveled with astonishing speed. Within a couple of days, it was all over. But it wasn't an entirely bloodless affair. In a confused clash in a tunnel near the Parliament building, 3 civilians were killed. Just 3. Now, that number might seem small, but in that moment, it was a profound shock to the entire system. Those 3 deaths changed everything. The violence horrified both the coup plotters and the protesters. No one wanted a civil war. So the coup didn't just fail. Its collapse completely shattered the last shred of authority the Communist Party and the Central Soviet government had. It was the final fatal blow. And what followed wasn't a gradual decline anymore. It was a complete and total freefall. The empire that had taken decades to build, that had seemed so permanent, just came apart in a matter of months. The pace of the final collapse was just breathtaking. Just a couple of days after the coup failed, Gorbachev resigned as head of the Communist Party. But the real turning point, the absolute point of no return, came on December 1st. That's when Ukraine, the industrial and agricultural heartland of the Union, voted overwhelmingly for independence. Once Ukraine left, any realistic chance of holding the rest of it together was gone. The human impact of this was just staggering. Try to wrap your head around this. 25 million ethnic Russians suddenly woke up one day to find that the country they were born in no longer existed. They were now living as a minority in a brand new country. It was a profoundly disorienting and chaotic time for millions of people. And then came the final somber moment. On Christmas Day, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev went on television and resigned as president of a country that had, for all intents and purposes, already ceased to exist. That night, the red hammer and sickle flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the very last time. There's a well-known saying that I think perfectly encapsulates the complex, contradictory legacy of the USSR. He who doesn't mourn the Soviet Union has no heart, but anyone who would go back to what it was has no head. It speaks to that sense of nostalgia for the stability and superpower pride, that feeling that something great was lost. But it's balanced by the clear-eyed recognition of the repression, the scarcity, and the failure that also defined it. So, in the end, we're left with this massive question. Was the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, as some have claimed? Or was it the painful but necessary birth of new nations, new freedoms, and new possibilities? It's been more than 30 years, and honestly, the world is still living with and debating the answer.